I would like to caution you and remind you that to exercise these privileges takes much more than just legal right. It requires a trained mind and a healthy body. It requires a decent home and the chance to find a job and the opportunity to escape from the clutches of poverty. Of course, people cannot contribute to the nation if they are never taught to read or write, if their bodies are stunted from hunger, if their sickness goes untended, if their life is spent in hopeless poverty, just drawing a welfare check. So we want to open the gates to opportunity. But we're also going to give all our people, black and white, the help that they need to walk through those gates. The program I shall propose will emphasize this cooperative approach to help that 1/5 of all American families with incomes too small to even meet their basic needs. Our chief weapons in a more pinpointed attack will be better schools and better health and better homes and better training and better job opportunities to help more Americans, especially young Americans, escape from squalor and misery and unemployment.
Let's go back 50 years ago this week to the announcement of the war on poverty by President Johnson. Talk about just what that war on poverty was. In fact, it was specific.
It was very specific. And first, thank you for, I'm delighted to be with you this morning. So there were really two layers to what President Johnson did. One was the war on poverty. The other was the larger Great Society. And so when we think about that period of time, we need to understand that the big things were Medicare and Medicaid and the historic civil rights laws and the first ever federal aid to elementary and secondary education. The war on poverty was very specific, and it was good things. It was Head Start. It was legal services for low-income people, community health centers, all things that we still have, all things that have made a difference. But in and of themselves, that narrower group of things was not going to end poverty. It has made a contribution to help in a variety of ways, and it continues. But it was a narrower idea. We do need to understand that.
And Peter Edelman, what is it that made it possible for Johnson to cobble together such an enormous range of legislative acts to pursue this war on poverty?
It was in the context of the optimism and the positive feeling about America that we had after World War II and the tremendous economic boom that we'd had, although there'd been a recession at the end of the Eisenhower period. So we really were in a optimistic position where we thought we could do anything, later on go to the moon, all of that. Secondly, and very important, the civil rights movement made a major difference in terms of exposing injustice, racial injustice, but it immediately became clear as we achieved legal equality, and as President Johnson said, that didn't mean that somebody would be able to afford to buy a meal at a lunch counter. And so there was a kind of a upheaval from the bottom through the civil rights movement, as well as Johnson himself, who has to get for all the things that we think negatively in terms of the war in Vietnam. Johnson is our great president after Abraham Lincoln on civil rights, and he really cared about poverty from his own upbringing.
Well, let's go back, as you're mentioning the impact of the civil rights movement on the war on poverty. Let's go back to one of President Johnson's the 1964 State of the Union address, where he declared that war. He drew upon his personal experiences as a teacher working among impoverished Mexican students in South Texas.
Mm-hmm. Now, you never forget what poverty and hatred can do when you see its scars on the hopeful face of a young child. I never thought then, in 1928, that I would be standing here in 1965. It never even occurred to me in my fondest dreams that I might have the chance to help the sons and daughters of those students and to help people like them all over this country. But now I do have that chance. And I'll let you in on a secret. I mean to use it.
Peter Edelman, your response to a president making such a forceful statement about how he's going to use his power to achieve the social aims of his administration?
To me, of course, it is something that we would like to hear from our leaders in that degree of deep feeling. Now, it's a very different time politically. It is also true that as of the election that gave us the 89th Congress beginning in 1965, we had enormous majorities of Democrats in the House and the Senate. And also a much more bipartisan approach to so many issues. The civil rights laws wouldn't have been passed without Republican support. Food stamps then, and really until very recently, was bipartisan in its support. Richard Nixon was the first president to send a message to Congress asking for a national food stamp program. Bob Dole defended the food stamp program in the early 80s. George W. Bush very recently was a strong supporter of the food stamp program. So we had a different politics than we do right at the moment anyway. President Obama's done a lot about poverty, and I think we should be very clear about that. The Medicaid expansion in the Affordable Care Act is of historic dimension. What was in the in the Recovery Act was terrific for low-income people in our country. So we have leadership, but Lyndon Johnson, those words do ring very strong for us.
On Wednesday, Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida outlined sweeping changes to the federal government's anti-poverty programs.
Our current president and his liberal allies, what they propose to address this, their proposal is let's spend more on these failed programs and let's increase the minimum wage to $10.10. This is their solution to what the president has called the defining issue of our time? Raising the minimum wage may poll well, but having a job that pays $10 an hour is not the American dream. And our current government programs, at best, offer only a partial solution. They help people deal with poverty, but they do not help people emerge from poverty. Therefore, what I am proposing today is the most fundamental change to how the federal government fights poverty and encourages upward mobility since President Johnson first conceived the war on poverty 50 years ago today. I am proposing that we turn over Washington's anti-poverty programs and the trillions that are spent on them to the states. Our anti-poverty program should be replaced with a revenue-neutral flex fund. We would streamline most of our existing federal anti-poverty funding into a single agency. Then each year, these flex funds would be transferred to the states so they can design and fund creative initiatives that address the factors behind inequality of opportunity. This worked in the 1990s with welfare reform.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida speaking yesterday. Peter Edelman, your response.
I'm glad that Senator Rubio and some of the other Republicans have discovered poverty this week. These ideas are not going to get us anywhere, there are a lot of workers out there who are struggling very hard, who would find it very constructive if Congress would act, if the Republicans would support President Obama's proposal to get the minimum wage up to $10 an hour. I'm the first to say, long before Senator Rubio, that we need to have wages that are higher than that. We need to have returns from work that help people get out of poverty. He's not proposing one thing. Turning it over to the states is a shop-worn idea. It goes back decades. What it does is it leaves it to states like Mississippi and Texas and others that could care less. And of national standards like food stamps. Are people hungrier in New York than they are in Mississippi? I don't think so. And to say, well, the state will decide how hungry you are and how much we'll pay makes no sense.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the record, too, of some Democrats in the last few decades in continuing to fight for the ideals of Johnson's war on poverty. You, in 1996, resigned in protest after President Clinton signed the Welfare Reform Act. Can you talk about some of the retreat that has occurred on this war, even among Democrats?
One of the unfortunate things that we've done over the last 40 years, along with doing smart things like expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit and enacting the Child Health Insurance Act under President Clinton and the Affordable Care Act now, was to just slash a huge hole in our safety net. Which was ending the AFDC, the old welfare program, which was not a satisfactory program and needed to be reformed in a progressive way, and instead essentially to throw people off the rolls, so that we now have less than 4 million people who are receiving cash assistance, and that's about women and children in our country, so that we end up with 6 million people in our country whose only income is from food stamps. 6 million people. That's 2% of the American people. That's an income of $6,000. In other words, about 30% of the poverty line. That was a bad thing that we did. In Wyoming now, for example, because it's completely up to the states and there's no legal right, there are only 600 people, 4% of poor children in Wyoming, and that's actually typical of about half of our states. So we made a huge mistake there, and that was self-inflicted in terms of our safety net and our anti-poverty strategies.